Hi, this is John Jackson Miller, Star Wars author. You're listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you were looking for.
New experiences inspired by Encanto and Indiana Jones are being considered for the reimagined land at Disney's Animal Kingdom.
Presto Magic's Return of the Jedi makes the action come alive.
Ahsoka is one of the most well-developed characters in Star Wars, period.
Wait. What happened? Where am I?
Master?
We tried take after take after take. Nothing satisfied me. And finally, I said, Harrison, don't think about it. Don't think about it. Let's do it. Okay, action.
I love you.
I know.
And he dropped in and I said, cut. I said, yeah, that's a great line. That's Han Solo.
This is Ashley Eckstein, Ahsoka Tano from Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to Coffee with Kenobi. This is your weekly spoiler-free place for Star Wars community and conversation. I'm your host, Dan Zaire, delighted to talk Star Wars with each and every one of you. Since May of 2013, whether you're a fan of Star Wars films, Disney Plus live action and animation, books, comics, collectibles, or Star Wars opportunities at the Disney theme parks, on Coffee with Kenobi, you are among friends as we virtually share a cup of coffee while talking about this galaxy far, far away. Thank you to the official travel partner of Coffee with Kenobi, MEI and Mouse Fan Travel. Check out coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefantravel for a no-cost, no-obligation quote, and let them know Coffee with Kenobi and Dan Zaire sent you. Coffee with Kenobi is also brought to you by Thomas Coffee, a fresh, delicious artisan coffee expertly roasted since 1905. There's a taste for everybody and an experience in every cup. I have a special discount code exclusively to CWK listeners, and it's actually a better one than the one we have been advertising. It is now 20% off, so use the code DNZCWK20 for 20% off your order. On today's show, Ross Hollebon and Jen Sopchockchai join me as we talk about part 5 of the epic Disney Plus series, Ahsoka. So pull up a chair, grab your favorite coffee mug, and let's have some coffee with Kenobi. Here we are, friends. It is time to talk about the epic 5th part of Ahsoka. The episode is titled Shadow Warrior. I'm your host, Dan Zaire, and I am joined, as always, when we talk about episodes of Ahsoka, first, all the way from Indianapolis and Chicago, and fortunately the Pergils were with him, Ross Hollebon. Ross, welcome back, buddy.
Dan, thank you so much. What an amazing, 24 hours at this point, and being able to watch things. I'm so glad it was not a 3.5-hour drive and 7-hour round trip to reach this episode tonight. But all of that driving to Chicago yesterday was worth it.
Excellent. Well, it's also worth it if you're listening to the show, because we've got not one, but 2 special guest co-hosts. And returning again is the one and only Jen Sopchockchai. Jen, welcome back.
It's the Pergils world. We just live in it. Hi, Dan. Hi,
Hello. Is that part of the academic corner, or is that a bonus?
No, that's bonus material.
It's
bonus
good.
Content.
It's good. I thought, gosh, I didn't give her a Pergil entrance, but I didn't have to. You took care of business as you always do. So we're going to talk, of course, at length about the episode. Naturally, there will be spoilers, as you all know. But before we actually get into the individuality of the episode, Ross had quite a journey. So if you could just fill us in kind of quickly on your experiences, because as several people know, I believe in 10 cities across the United States, you could go for free to an AMC theater, and there are a few places in Europe, I believe, we could go and watch this 5th episode on the big screen. Ross, you had your tickets, you were all ready to go, you drove 3.5 hours. Let us know how the Force was with you and how a certain Jedi named Brooke helped save the day.
Yeah, it was really magical because I got there much later than anticipated because something happened at work, and then I hit rush hour traffic in Chicago. So the final 18 miles took an hour and a half.
Oh, yeah.
And I was sitting there just like, oh my God, please let me be able to get into this. Let me be able to get into this. Showed up, and I was turned away, even though I had my ticket. It is not a sob story for me. There were a whole bunch of people that got turned away. So it's very frustrating from that regard. I had heard that this had happened before with other people. First time I've experienced it, because typically I am the one there 2 hours early. Didn't play out, but I stayed there, and there was great energy the whole way through. So like even people that didn't make it, some of them got posters. They were all gone when I got there too. But there was just a great buzz. There was so much energy, people excited. And I'm guessing these other groups of people were all just going home to watch it. But I had waited that long, driven that long. I was like, I'm just going to hang out here and wait and see what happens. Up until I'm going to wait like 5 minutes after 7. It started at 7 o'clock there. And it played out where there were 5 of us still waiting. And the woman who did a fantastic job, I felt so bad for her and how many people she had to turn away. Like she had a rough job to do, but handled it very well, and comes forward and she points to these 2 guys. There's 2 in the very front row that you can sit in. So they got in. So then I've got 2 other people in front of me. She comes back. I hear her talking to someone. She's like, oh, 2 more. And I hear those. She comes over and she's like, you can't sit together, but there's a seat here and a seat here. And they went in. And then it's like, I'm the only one there. And I'm just like, oh, look how this is going to work out. And then she comes over and she's like, yeah, this woman right on the aisle, when you walk in, she decided to put her kid on her lap to open a seat so you can go in.
Did she know or hear you talking before? Or just worked out?
No, I think they just went in and probably made an announcement like, hey, everyone, are there any empty seats? We have an overflow and people waiting to get in. And then Brooke McDonald, I will not be able to promote her enough. So it's at Brooke with an E, G McDonald, Brooke G McDonald. On
she's
Instagram
got the unmistakable picture of her drinking the blue milk. That's how that's how I first got to know Brooke.
And I'm sitting down, and I mean, it's literally like 3 minutes before it all starts. So we have the fastest conversation ever. Is their son Auden's there, and he's got his Grogu hoodie on and just excited to be there and all energy. And we talked about Coffee with Kenobi. She's like, oh, I know Dan. So that was hilarious. And she said, oh, I know the Fantha Tracks guys. So it was immediately just like, okay. I went through such a roller coaster of emotions, like from the time I left work until I laid down in bed at 1:30 in the morning. And as I look back on it, I was like, I was so fortunate. And, there are good people out there doing great things like that and being selfless. So Brooke, thank you so much.
Yes, we so appreciate Brooke. Thank you, my friend. What a great community we have, right? Working together. And I like it even more that she didn't even know that it was you. She was just doing something kind. And that's who she is. So thank you again so much. What an awesome thing. What an awesome experience. I'm hoping, Ross, as we talk about this episode, you will sort of point out for us how it was to see this on the big screen. Because us civilians, Jen and I, we did not have that experience. We watched it from the comforts of our home. But you know what? It worked out just fine. So let's talk about the episode. Again, the episode is Shadow Warrior. This is the one that we always I shouldn't say but there was just a general sense. This was just over the halfway point of the season. We knew it was going to be special. When Lucasfilm and Disney are promoting, hey, this one is going to be on big screens, that's not for fun. There's purpose and intent behind it. So we're going to just break this thing down. Jen, let's start with you. Give me your letter grade. I'm sorry, no, letter grade is going to be at the end. Follow the script, Dan. So give me one word to describe the episode and your overall thoughts on Shadow Warrior.
Sure. I went through quite a few, including rebirth, renewal, but I landed on life affirming because I think that encapsulates both my experience as an audience member watching the episode and what Ahsoka is kind of going through. in this trial that she has in the episode. So for me, the most powerful thing was when she chooses to live, and kind of the whole process of her arriving at that moment where she can say that confidently, I choose life. That really hit me, because it was sort of like, we up until that point, we go through all these parts of her life where she, she's made mistakes, she's lost a lot, right? And in spite of all that, she still chooses to move forward. And I feel like that's something that we can all relate to, right? That life has its ups and downs, and no matter how hard it gets, we can always choose to keep going. And for me, that was such a special moment for me and for this character.
Fabulous. Similar, your expression and explanation of Ahsoka is not unlike Ross's last night.
Yes.
Keep going,
Yes.
man. Things work out. Ross, what's your one word and overall reactions?
My word is youth. For one reason, it made me feel like a little kid, especially watching on that big screen. And I don't want to get into all the conversation parts now, but there were so many moments where I just caught myself smiling as wide as my grin would go. And my face was a little sore driving home, because it was like that so much. And reading the reaction of everyone else in the room, where it is something big happens and you're getting individual yells, you're getting group like oohs and ahs, and it was special in that regard and made me feel like a little kid. But then, we're getting Jason in the incredible role he plays in this, young Ahsoka, and that surprise, Brooke's son Auden, who, when it ended and I saw the smile on his face as he's like, Purgle, and that's like, he knew his stuff, I was just like, you know what? I'm so glad I made it in, but this show is for him. And his reaction to that made it all awesome, knowing that Henry was with Greg in the theater in Boston as well. So it's the youth, and that's what Star Wars is all about. And they did it on the screen, but they did it through the experience as well. So that made it perfect.
Right. It's so fun to, one of the best things about really since COVID is that now podcasting with cameras is pretty general. Like for most of the experiences I've had over the 10 plus years of Coffee with Kenobi, cameras weren't used. We just talked and you could hear each other, and you kind of learn to listen to intonations. And when I can almost tell now rhythmically through this and teaching when someone's going to stop and they're about to end their thought. Jen, you can probably all do that. But seeing you tell that, Ross has the biggest smile on his face. He's not exaggerating. It's really joyful. My word is Campbellian. There is so much of the hero's journey in this thing, particularly the meatier elements of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey steps. They're wonderful. They're quite literal in many instances. And I think overall, this is one for the record books. It's a tremendous episode. I am going to put a caveat and say that I did not like it as much as I did last week's. And I think I have some pretty good reasons why, but it's brought up some terrific conversations. And before I forget, because I probably will forget, I think I owe AMC maybe a little bit of an apology, because I did something very undan-like on CWK Live this week. When I knew that my buddy drove that far and was not going to get into the movie, I was upset. And I said publicly, look, I don't blame Disney. I don't blame Lucasfilm. I think this is poor management of ticket distribution by AMC. And I was very vocal. So I guess I owe them an apology, because an employee reached out to me. It was quite tactful and graceful. And he said, you know what? They always give out more tickets because they're afraid they're not going to fill up the theater. Now, we can certainly quibble with the attitude behind that, because this affects people and human beings. And because sometimes traveling great distances or taking time off work. So while I don't completely agree with the logic behind that, I respect it. And it doesn't matter ultimately anyway, because Brooke got you in.
Yeah.
So there we go. My palate is cleansed. Okay, on to the show. I think the biggest takeaway from this for me is, of course, Anakin and Ahsoka. I mean, how could it not be? Jen has got the big smile on her face now, too. And I want to know, Jen, you mentioned Ahsoka and her struggles and what she learned and how it was life. Did you say life affirming? Was that your word?
Mhm. Yes.
Okay, that's great. So let's explore that a little bit more as far as what this did for you, for her as a character, being such a big Ahsoka fan.
I think it really was on one level sort of a celebration of her as a character, right? Because like just from a fan experience, if someone has been with her through the animated series, getting those sequences in live action is huge, right? It just seeing those individually without context at all would be thrilling, right? But I feel like what's even more important is that the episode did such an amazing, like that, those sequences, the World Between Worlds sort of Christmas Carol-esque flashback sequences, had so much meaning packed into them, and really kind of gave us a comprehensive look into Ahsoka's psychology as a character, right? What has she been carrying with her, even from being a teenager in the Clone Wars, right? Where she says, this is not what I signed up for. Right? She's upset about it. She's like, this is not what I trained for. This is not what I thought I was signing up for when I was becoming a Jedi. And just the sort of reconciliation of that, I think, is so beautiful. And just from a writing perspective, because I have seen a couple of more critical responses sort of talking about yearning for more from the dialogue in these sequences. But to me, and I can definitely understand that, like, because you always want characters to say to each other the things that they've never said, right? Like to be more explicit and open with one another. But I feel like what's so brilliant about the way that those scenes are written is that they work on two levels, and that's so hard. They work as in the context of the flashbacks, right? So especially the early Clone Wars one, where all the lines like could feasibly be Anakin back then talking to Ahsoka back then. But then they also have this other level where it's Anakin in the World Between Worlds training Ahsoka now, finishing her training. And I just loved, like, I went back and I just watched those scenes and just like every single line just sort of paused and thought, okay, what are those two levels of meaning? And I feel like that's an extreme high degree of difficulty to pull off. And to make it authentic and not heavy-handed, right?
No.
And so that's what really impressed me the most, is that it's both a look back at Ahsoka as a character, but also very, very much where she is right now, and doing that simultaneously, I think, is very hard.
And I really like the idea that she is constantly representing two conflicts: her internal conflict and search for identity, coupled with learning to be a warrior. And what do you mean I have to be a warrior? I'm a Jedi, right? That's the classic thing we've been sort of scratching our heads with since 1999 in Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, and how that actually impacts her and her place in the world, her place internally, and her place with her master, and her struggles with how to identify with this guy who I loved like a brother for so long, and then became something far worse than anyone could possibly ever imagine. So, Ross, when you're watching this, what did you learn about Ahsoka through her training with Anakin? I know that's a lot. That's a big question. We could just talk about just this the entire episode easily.
Yeah, and I bet there will be episodes of this moving forward after the season. But I think what we learn is she's being forced to deal with her own demons. And Baylan really got to her, and I think helped surface a lot of it through the things that he said in the previous episode. So it was those jabs. It is, it may have been stuff that she pushed deep down and pretended wasn't there, but she is part of a lineage that shaped the universe or shaped the galaxy, and she's dealing with that. And now the only thing on her mind is, as Baylan saying, hey, this is the only way, she wants it to go a different way. She doesn't want our favorite blue skin Chiss to be there. She wants there to be peace, and she's fighting for that at this point, knowing who she is, knowing that she could battle, she could fight, and it sometimes surfaces because it's all about maintaining that composure. And that is what she's been focused on. And where everyone's like, oh, Ahsoka's boring this season so far. I think that's what it's been. She is just pressed down so much that she hasn't been able to be herself. And we finally got to see her really take off this episode. And look out once our special space buses arrive.
Space buses.
What do you two think about what these scenes tell us about the idea of legacy in Star Wars? Because that to me was a very powerful moment where Anakin sort of says, you're part of a legacy, but her response, and clearly this is sort of her psychological guilt that she's been carrying with her. Like, if I'm all of you, that means I'm also all of Vader. And first of all, visually, I thought that the paradox of Anakin and Vader,
it's great,
handled brilliantly.
Phenomenal.
Like the flashes and the shot where he's walking off into the smoke and the fire, and then you just see a quick flash of Vader. And I love that I love that it didn't shy away from the kind of complicated nature of Anakin and Vader as because we often treat them as two characters because that makes it easier, right? To be like, well, Anakin died and then Vader was born, right? But this is very much just embracing both of the duality of the character in a way that's really great. Sorry, I got sidetracked, but I feel like what's this idea of legacy? Because I think it's trying to tell us, it's all a part of the legacy, and even if there's some darkness there, it's okay. Like, that was sort of the impression I get, but I'm curious, like, what do you feel like is the commentary about Star Wars in general in this?
Oh, I got a lot of thoughts on this. So again, when I write my reviews every week, I always feel like they're just kind of like window dressing, because I don't really go very deeply in the reviews because I try to save the stuff for this. I feel like there's three levels of ideology here. I think there's the surface ideology, which is, when Anakin says, everything I am, all my knowledge I possess to you, now you have all those things. I sort of have a problem with that statement. And I think of it as a parent. I mean, yes, everything I am is passed on in some way, shape, or form to my children, but they also have choice. I don't know if you can hear, but my dog desperately wants to weigh in on this and is barking in the background. So thanks, Zoe, for your input on that.
What choice does Zoe have on these things?
None, because I hope that she'll stop barking. So that's the first ideology. The second ideology is the one that the director or the writer is trying to espouse. And as it turns out, Dave Filoni is both of them. And I think it stands to reason to say, and it's not hyperbolic to say, that Dave Filoni is brilliant and that he is just a stunning storyteller. His directory, his craft, his cinematography, it turns out to be even more gorgeous. I feel like part of that is his background in animation, him understanding how to tell a story with imagery sometimes, as well as in dialogue and character development. He's obviously good with actors. I thought he brought out an incredible performance from Hayden Christensen, who doesn't get enough credit for his role as Anakin Skywalker, because speaking of legacy. So I think on the second level, I think Dave is trying to talk about the notion of master to Padawan and teacher to student, but he's also talking about the fact that, hey, look, everybody in Star Wars land and fandom, even though the Skywalkers are done, they're actually not, because Ahsoka's part of this. So it's sort of a brilliant, it's not purposeful marketing, but it's brilliant because it's saying, we aren't done. Luke is done. Leia is done. Anakin is done. But Ahsoka, you're part of it. And you're going to carry on the torch. Because, we could have Ahsoka Tano for 20 years. And, with Rosario Dawson. Let's hope that we do, by the way. And I don't think anyone will be sad about that. So I think there's three levels of ideology there. But I think the biggest thing that I want to talk about with this is, and Jen, I don't want to circumvent what you were asking, was there more that I missed? Because I'm scatterbrained, apparently.
No, I was just asking about legacy.
Oh yeah, I think that's what I think it is. I think it's the torch passing.
Mm-hmm.
Ross, go ahead before I have a big rant, but I'll wait. Go ahead, Ross. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think the legacy's there for any of them, and I mean, whether you're looking at Han, Leia, and Ben, Everyone's got their own paths, and you can't control what the next person's going to do. All you can do is try to guide them. And that's what so many of these individuals do, is just like, hey, I can show you the path. You still have to make your decisions, and your life experiences are going to impact those. And I think that's the biggest thing. And, I know, Dan, you don't love the term gray Jedi, but that's that place where there is that little bit of, I don't just have to do everything exactly this way down the line. I can go off the line to achieve goals sometimes without doing wrong. It's just going against this thing.
Right. Which is man-made and not force-made. Right. Yeah. And that's why I've always resisted the notion that Ahsoka is so not a gray Jedi. She's the epitome of the light, I think. And
she's definitely not the gray Jedi now.
No, literally. She's talk about a Gandalf metamorphosis. We'll get to that. Okay, here's my challenge with this. The biggest crux of this, the biggest presupposition we are asked to buy into is this. Ahsoka has something to learn. Ahsoka's big lesson, we are told, is that Anakin says, you have to fight. You got to learn to fight. Eventually she says, I don't want to fight. You can tell she's tired, that she has this wonderful tender moment with a clone who's passing away, and she holds his hand, and then he dies, and she's very emotional about it. She's very sad, and understandably so. There's connection there. And we see these important moments in her life. But are these important moments in her life? Or are these important live matter events in her life for us as Star Wars fans? Because, and I mean this with all respect, but I when it was over, I was just so blown away by the spectacle and so in awe of the magnitude of the story and what it represents for Star Wars fans. But I'm not convinced of two things. I'm not convinced that Ahsoka had much of an internal struggle to begin with, because we haven't seen that really through the entire arc of her character. There may be some little nuanced ones in Clone Wars that I'm just not remembering, and I hope that is the case. In Mando and Book of Boba Fett, she has some struggles and trepidation because of her, I don't want to train anybody because I saw what happened to Anakin. And maybe that's it. Maybe it's just as straightforward as, hey, Anakin was a poopy, and I don't want to be a poopy, and I want to be nice, and I don't want to be like that. That could very well be. But at the end of this, she learns, hey, I got to fight if I want to live. That's metaphorical. But I think when you look at her fight with Baylan Skoll, I thought she was sort of holding back, or something was holding her back from giving her all. There was something, internal hanging her up. I get it. I just don't feel like this internal conflict, it was so nuanced, and maybe I'm just not smart enough to get it, and that's very possible. But I don't know that it was necessarily earned in this episode. And what she ultimately learns is, I want to fight. I need to fight, not just for the lightsaber, but fight for my right to live and to survive and be all I can be and be well-rounded. All true. But I'm not convinced that this is a unique Ahsoka Tano conflict. I feel like you could say this about the majority of protagonists throughout the history of narrative. So I was sort of struck by, wow, that was great. That was awesome. And I looked at Mason and I said, what did Ahsoka learn? And he's like, well, and so we tried to talk about it, but I kept spinning my wheels, and I thought, I've got to talk to Dr. Jen and Dr. Ross to help me figure this out.
And what I saw is very much, and back to the Zen Buddhism that I brought up before, I saw that moment of enlightenment for her and that light bulb go off, but it was during the anger, and it was her resignation, because she loved Anakin so devoutly, imagining that he could become the most powerful monster in the galaxy, I think is what tore her up. Like, did I cause this? Was this because he was my master? Were there other things that I could have done? But when she gives that sideways look in that kind of snarl snap, but more powerful and dangerous than anyone realized, when you know that someone can become that powerful and then use it for negative reasons, it makes it a lot harder to train someone else. So I think it was her realizing this is an individual thing. This happened here. I need to get over this so that I can teach Sabine properly, so that I can get on with my life. This wasn't my fault. And even though I was trained this way to be a warrior and to be, what did she say? My legacy is of death and war.
Mm-hmm.
She's not letting the legacy define her anymore. And I think when she decided that was the case, that is when she was enlightened.
I love that. I think that's incredibly insightful. And I appreciate you teaching me that. I guess I still don't see the breadcrumbs, the narrative breadcrumbs that lead to that, besides just intuitively being an intelligent person who understands human nature. Because if it really is about her intense struggles to train Sabine, then we are being asked to understand the steep emotional pivotal moment from a character that has been around since 2007, 2008. And we don't have that part of the story. Like, so there's an emotional arc, a powerful resolution to a degree to a story that we literally do not have a beginning to. And that's challenging for me.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge here is there's a huge chunk of her story but we're skipping ahead. That Dave Filoni has filled in, I think, because all the references seem very like it's referring to something very specific, but we have not yet actually seen it in full. But for me, I think there was enough in Twilight of the Apprentice and Rebels that sort of filled in a lot of, like, that informed a lot of my understanding of what she was wrestling with here. But also, I feel like the references in the previous episode, because Ross had mentioned earlier that Baylan Skoll's comments of your legacy, like your masters, is of death and destruction. Mm-hmm. That, but also the idea that the other thing Baylan says, and says it to Sabine, of your family died on Mandalore because your master didn't trust you. So I feel like that's also part of what's happening here, because there's a moment in the first flashback scene where young Ahsoka says, "Is this all I'm going to be able to teach my Padawan too?" Yeah. And then Anakin says, "Do you even want a Padawan?" And I feel like, again, it's one of those moments where it works in the context of the scene, right? Because he's kind of like making fun of the fact that he has to he's stuck with her and he didn't really want to be your master and all that stuff. But also it's definitely commenting on her relationship with Sabine, and that like she's rejected her as a Padawan, and partly because she doesn't want to continue this legacy. I think that she feels like all she has to offer is the warrior, which Sabine already has in spades because she's a Mandalorian. Right? Yes. So I think that for me was a big part of it. But I do agree that it's very much subtextual in a lot of ways. And actually, this segues perfectly into what I had for Academic Corner.
Good.
So this is probably good.
I had a feeling. I honestly, legitimately had a feeling.
And welcome to the academic round.
So this week I turned to Tolkien. Who is it?
Seems apt considering what Ahsoka looks like.
a big yes, that's sort of where it started. But I went back and I dug up my copy. Actually, I still have it on my desk. My copy of the collection of letters that he wrote.
Oh, cool.
And it's letter number 156, in case anyone wants to go look it up. And it's specifically talking about Gandalf as a character, and the sort of implication that the letter is kind of responding to criticism that Gandalf cheated death, and that was sort of like a narrative shortcut, which I actually didn't really realize until I reread this that was the thing. But what he says is,
"This is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi."
Since the beginning of this show, CWK has wanted you to feel like you were enjoying coffee while talking about this franchise that you love so much. So it only seems natural that CWK would have its own coffee company that they work with. Thomas Coffee is the official sponsor and coffee provider of Coffee with Kenobi. Thomas Coffee started in 1905 and has grown and established itself as a premier coffee They have over 25 different flavors of coffee, including classics like almond, hazelnut, French vanilla, and so many more. Thomas Coffee is known for 5 different single origin coffees with a variety of different blends and roast profiles. So that may mean something to many of you who are coffee connoisseurs. Here's what I know. I know what I like. I know that it tastes good, and I know what I enjoy. You know, there's something about when you get coffee and you go into a coffee shop, or you go and get some and bring it home, and you open it up and you smell those beans, and they're just incredible, and it just reminds you of why you love coffee so much. And that is one of the reasons why I love Thomas Coffee. It tastes great, smells great, and it is honestly my favorite coffee out there right now. And I feel like I can say that with full confidence because that's how much I love it. It's one thing to say Thomas Coffee ensures consistently great taste, and it's another thing to prove it. They have been Lamita certified since 1984, and here's what that means. Every cup you enjoy is backed by a rich tradition of completely natural and sustainable farming techniques, water management systems, and environmentally and socially responsible fair trade practices. And this is before fair trade was a trendy thing. They roast their coffee in-house to make sure they are sending out the best possible product to Thomas Coffee customers. Plus, Thomas Coffee ships nationwide too. You can order Thomas Coffee on their website, thomascoffees.com. For my Coffee with Kenobi listeners, you can use the discount code DANZCWK20 for 20% off your order. That's right, they have kicked in an extra 10% off because that is how awesome they are. Again, use that code DANZCWK20 for 20% off your order.
He must return at that point, and such explanations of his survival as are explicitly set out must be given there, but the narrative is urgent and must not be held up for elaborate discussions involving the whole mythological setting. It is a little impeded even so, though I have severely cut Gandalf's account of himself. I may perhaps have made more clear the later remarks in Volume 2 and Volume 3, which refer to or are made by Gandalf, but I have purposefully kept all allusions to the highest matters down to mere hints, perceptible only by the most attentive, or kept them under unexplained symbolic forms. And I feel like, to me, this is exactly the approach that Filoni is taking. That it's like, we're not going to be like yelling off the rooftops exactly what we're supposed to be getting out of this, but it's up to the reader. It's trusting the reader, or in this case, the viewer, to be able to pick up those breadcrumbs, take those hints, and create their own meaning as to how this is happening and what's happening and what Ahsoka is learning.
Well,
I like that. Oh, sorry.
Is this
just
a lightsaber question of what color highlighter did Filoni use to highlight that comment in his copy of the book?
Well, maybe at first it was green, then it was 2 blue ones, probably. You know, so if that's true, and I of course love Tolkien, and it was impossible not to think of Gandalf, especially with her adorned in white through the ending of this thing. But if that's true, and he's purposely leaving context out, then I feel emotionally manipulated, if that is in fact true. Because to me, that I get that from a Tolkien point of view, because Tolkien was pretty famous, and look, there isn't meanings. The ring isn't a symbol of anything. It's a ring. It's really bad. I'm absolutely paraphrasing. But Tolkien was pretty adamant about, no, this isn't a symbol for World War I or anything like that. I think, I think it's fair to say that people have been listening to the show know that I like questions more than answers. I don't like being spoon-fed. I like thinking. Corey, and the biggest argument Corey and I ever had was when we left Guardians of the Galaxy in the movie theater. We argued the whole way home about, well, hey, why do you always have to think when you watch movies? Why can't you just have fun with them? And I'm like, but that is fun. That is fun for me. And Corey will laugh. Corey and I laugh about that all the time. But so I want to be able to think about it. And I do agree that there's a lot of stuff there, and I don't need to be spoon-fed. And I certainly don't want all the answers in one episode. I want to have it extrapolated out. But that is such a key moment when they learn from each other. And he says, there's hope for you yet. And there's this loud crash. And she turns around and she turns back and he's gone. But I still have a hard time finding a payoff to when I don't have all of the pieces. I mean, it would be different if all the pieces were there and I had to connect some dots, but I don't have, I have a jigsaw puzzle and there's a couple of pieces of Ahsoka that are missing, I think. So I feel the more I talk about this, I'm actually more frustrated than I was when I started. But I'm good with that.
We're here for you for that. Yeah,
yes.
Jen and I are great at that.
I mean, does it make sense? Am I just
well? And I think that's that's some of the biggest feedback, and especially for fans that haven't watched animation, of okay, why should I care about this? Why does this matter? And it does. It puts it on two different planes of experience for those that have been able to watch and read more than, even a very knowledgeable casual fan. So there's those elements, and it's, I'm just kind of along for the ride at this point. This is almost like patchwork, like Pulp Fiction. And are we going to get other parts of the story now that Ahsoka's had this moment? Is she going to open up to Sabine and say, I'm sorry that I cost you your family? I'm sorry. Is that going to lead potentially? I'm just saying it opens it up for it. I don't know if it's going to happen or not. Ahsoka just grew and learned. And I think we're going to see a good opportunity for her to show that she has done that and hopefully fill in some of those blanks.
Have we figured out why she thinks that she's one of the reasons why Sabine lost her family? Did anyone figure that out?
Not yet. I mean, I think it's just that. I mean, she referenced her.
It was mentioned earlier.
Not being there.
Yeah,
I think timeline wise, it has to be the Purge, right? The thing that Bo-Katan also haunts Bo-Katan in season 3 of The Mandalorian.
Probably when Ahsoka was in hiding, maybe, and she blames herself for being in hiding and not helping. That could be.
I mean, it feels like it has to be a very Luke Yoda thing where your training's not finished. You can't go help them.
Right.
And then they all died. Right. Like, so whereas Luke made the other choice, right? Luke was like, sorry, Yoda, I'm out of here. Right. I got to help my friends.
Sure.
So that's my best guess, but you're right. Like the show itself has not provided any answers to that. We only know about the fallout from that, not
right.
what actually happened.
And I, we'll wrap this up, but I like the notion of her struggling with her identity as far as, I don't just want to have a legacy of death, because Anakin was like that. And Anakin, I love that he's like, is that what this is about? Like, and he starts to get mad, but he's not really mad. This is just part of, like, I refer to this in my review as this is like a Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol to a degree, sort of a Funhouse Mirror version of that, because she's going through where we're told key moments in history. I personally think if you were going to put a keynote in history, I think it should be when she leaves the Jedi Order. I don't think anything is bigger than that.
Yeah.
But her first battle, the Siege of Mandalore, is significant because Anakin isn't there, so you can have this great conversation about, hey, I don't recognize this battle. And it's not lost on me at the end when he turns back to Vader and he's got the red lightsaber and she subdues him and she holds the lightsaber. And I caught it much more the second time, but she held it up to him and she looked like she could have easily beheaded him.
Oh yeah.
And then she she looks at him, which is this terrific performance by Rosario Dawson here. And then as she turns off the blade, hits the emitter and turns it off, she throws it into the darkness at the exact same time. And maybe that's her way of saying, yo, I get frustrated sometimes, but I'm not evil, I'm good. And maybe again, I'm looking at like, of course Ahsoka's good. She's Ahsoka Tano. But I also have to remind myself, just like Anakin says, look, you're never too old to learn lessons. You're never too old to grow and to change. So it does make sense if she's been holding all this stuff inside, this fear and hatred and frustration with her master and what she's afraid of, how that might impact her. And this notion of, do I want to fight for what I believe in? And am I going to become a one-trick pony like I feared that my master was? Ultimately, she's not. And I love it. And again, I'm not taking anything away from this, but I think these are important questions to ask. And I've seen it a lot online. But even if I hadn't seen that, it's something that struck me as important.
Yeah. And it's great storytelling. And we know that there's more that can be filled in. Like how many questions are out there in the Star Wars galaxy that we don't know yet.
Right.
And I think that's part of the reason why I keep coming back for more.
Just put all the pieces in the box. Eventually I'll find them.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
and that's a beautiful way to do it. And then as they're having that lightsaber, what is just an overjoyed moment is getting Jason telling Hera, listen.
Yeah, let's talk about Jason. Was there there was a big reaction to Jason in the theater?
It was good. Like I think in the theater, like the big ones were Rex.
Oh yeah.
When you're first seeing the clone troopers run forward and the reactions there, like just lots of gasps. Hearing
and the fact that it was
Jarrus's
Tamira
name.
Morrison. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Hearing Morrison say that, and it's just like, oh my God, it's him. But there wasn't a wasted second of this episode, whether it be audio, visual. There was always something to pay attention to. So it was hard to get caught up in any cheering or anything because the next thing's coming right at you. Like Filoni was relentless in such a beautiful way with this episode. But Jason and the Ghost and Chopper, all of those elements and the shots that we got to see and everything. But that we got teased last time where, back to Colby Mead's love of the Jedi Tinglies. They really are the Jedi Tinglies, and he felt them, and now he knew that Ahsoka was in the water having a lightsaber battle.
Jason, to me, and first of all, I think his role in the series far exceeded anything I would have expected. I think I would have assumed at most he would have a cameo or just a tangential reference. We never see him. So the fact that he is actually a substantial character in this is amazing. But I think to go back to Ross's opening reaction, so much of the wonder and kind of the childlike wonder in this episode is possible because he's here, right? And because he's experiencing all of this for the first time, and that the Jedi for him are just stories he's heard about his father, right? Or stories that he's heard about what used to be and is not anymore. And that's, to me, has always been such a fundamental part of Star Wars, of this idea of like, oh, I've only heard sort of fairy tales about these things and they're real, right? And there's that kind of like discovery and wonderment, and even down to Carson Teva being like, okay, sure, like I don't know how I'm going to explain this to everybody, but sure, let's go. So I think that was both Carson and Jason, I think, in different ways are sort of anchoring the episode and grounding it with this sense, like, and being kind of our stand-ins as audience members to be like, wow, like, look, this is the Force. It really, you'd think that by now we'd be sort of desensitized to how awesome the Force is, right? But no chance.
Yeah, well, and that sound design of mixing the lightsabers with the crashing waves, like,
it's if this isn't Emmy worthy, I don't know what is. I'm really glad you brought up Carson Teva, because I think this is such an important moment in the lore of Star Wars when Hugh Yang is like, Jason has abilities, and Hugh Yang then is slow delivery, and he says his father, Kanan Jarrus, was a Jedi Knight. And for us, like, I have goosebumps. We're like, there's Kanan's name. It's Kanan Jarrus. We're acknowledging the and here, who? And then he goes, okay, like, whatever, man. So Carson Teva suddenly becomes like my wife, like me talking about the stories. So she's like, okay.
No, he's back to Kim's Convenience. He's just restocking the fridge at that point.
Yeah, it's like, whatever, man. Because I think it's important. Remember, Davis said a bunch of times, look, for us, the Force is this big deal and Jedi, but for the majority of people in the galaxy, it's like fantasy or folklore, or, that's why it's such a big deal when when Han Solo says it's true, all of it, the Force, the Jedi, most people aren't into that, and they're not exposed to that. The Emperor did a great job of purging that from everybody's ideas and from the galaxy. So I just really like that. It's a great little check-in. Dave again is so good with delivering great bits of narrative and exposition without watering us down with stuff. And speaking of that, I didn't plan that, but I'm going to pretend like I did. There's so much symbolism in this episode. I mentioned my word was Campbellian. The big steps in the hero's journey to me are the apotheosis. Clearly, apotheosis is death and rebirth. Gandalf is a great one because he dies, and I think it's in Fellowship, right? And he comes back in the Two Towers. Is that right in the books too? Because it's been a while.
Well,
since I
he
read the
plunges at least.
Yeah.
I guess
and he
I'm
talks
talking
for a
the
while
film.
about being both alive and dead and all this stuff. Harry Potter, of course. Luke goes through an apotheosis in New Hope where he doesn't actually physically die, but he dies to an old way of thinking. He says, what's wrong with your targeting computer? Nothing. I'm all right. He switches it off. He trusts in the Force. The rest is history. In this, Ahsoka, of course, goes to World Between Worlds. And then when it's time for her to come back, we get this wonderful gift. To me, this is such a staggeringly beautiful moment where English majors around the globe held hands and like in that old Coke commercial and just were so happy. You've got snow coming down. Snow's water, but it's frozen, right? It's not fully allowed to melt and flow and create and inspire that change. So she was originally coming down just like her growth was frozen and stilted, so we're led to believe. And then the bottom of the water rises up and encompasses and covers her and brings her up, and the snow and the water collide gracefully. And then eventually she floats to the surface. What a beautiful piece of imagery, showcasing that this person afraid to grow and to change and to accept suddenly is just awash in it. And Jen, did you love that too?
It was gorgeous. And I think just every transition in and out of the World Between Worlds has been visually stunning and as you said, full of symbolism. And, obviously the process you're describing, right, of water changing forms is cyclical, right?
Yes.
And so I feel like that's very meaningful, that, she's kind of coming around. To me, it was also a really nice callback, the snow, to the end of season 7 of Clone Wars. Right, which arguably is sort of the last, at least from our point of view, like the last Vader. Well, no, because there's Rebels, but like it's an iconic like parting of ways between Ahsoka and Vader, right? So yeah, that was sort of what I was reminded of. But yeah, I think just and also there's the playing around, and we had this in last week's episode too, playing around of perspective, right? It's kind of like a full 360 camera movement, where it's like sometimes things are upside down, sometimes things rotate and swing back around. And I think that's really helping too in terms of orienting us or disorienting us to Ahsoka's point of view and her experience.
And I think the most important part of that is that when the water comes up to her and it's about to like theoretically drown her, she just is so at peace and she's not going to die, but she's just very much embracing the next step. So that's great. And I'm sort of talking myself into being more at peace with some of my earlier challenges, which I was so subtle about. I don't know if you caught it or not.
I didn't even notice.
Yeah.
I do think though that Rosario Dawson's performance in this episode is on the one hand a relief, right? Because so many people were really skeptical about her performance up until not us, but those other people. But I feel like just the way that she changes her demeanor, like a huge weight has been lifted. And part of that is the visual storytelling too, right? That first scene when she's lying down in the shuttle and she's just kind of regaining consciousness. There's so much light that streams into the room. But her performance also has such a lightness to it after that point, where it really becomes evident like what has happened. Even if we don't know the specifics of what has happened to her, we know what has happened to her.
She's she's completely adorned in white as opposed to that darkish one that she'd worn most of her life, and much more like the finale of season 4 Rebels.
I was very curious if either of you, because this is something that I've watched it twice, and both times I kind of caught it, and I was like, okay, am I looking too much into this? When she's rescued and has just been pulled out of the water, and she's starting to come to a little bit, and she goes, Anakin. All that did was remind me of Luke on Hoth. Ben. And I don't know if I'm overthinking it, but it was just like, especially the second time I watched it, I was like, yep, that's exactly what I was thinking. Like when I heard her do it again, that's what I thought of.
It's
Do
a
you
fun
think this is the
callback.
last we've heard of Anakin in the series?
I don't. And I hope it isn't. And I just want to say as a quick little aside, Ross, one of the reasons I wanted you on the show is because you're an overthinker, like me and like Jen. So that's good. That's a good thing.
It's great for sleep. I can promise that.
Podcasts are built on overthinking.
That's right. Otherwise, it'd be a really short show. Welcome to the first and last episode of Coffee with Kenobi. Goodbye. The other important thing, I think, another key aspect of it, even though it's not in the correct order as far as the classic timeline of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, is the belly of the whale. Boy, oh boy. Talk about a literal and figurative example. Purgils are space whales. Ahsoka agrees to go inside a whale with her friends inside her Jedi starship. Now, typically, belly of the whale involves water. Obviously, this is the water we already had earlier, so this is all space oriented. But when you go into the belly of the whale, which again is an Old Testament reference to Jonah and the whale, you are going into it you're going somewhere completely surrounded, where you are completely cut off from everything you know, everything. And you go into this typically with the notion that you are willing to change, like you are at least open to the possibility that things are going to be a lot different when you get out of this little compartment. And it's not a little compartment, but the fact that she does it with such grace and dignity, she's outside knocking on the window of the cockpit, and she just seems so happy and at peace. She goes inside and they're like, do you know what's going to happen? She's like, I really don't know if this is going to work. But it's not irresponsible or careless. It's playful. It's light. And it's filled with faith and hope. It's such a wonderful example of discipleship. I found a lot of Christianity in it. I'm not saying that it is, but it's certainly there, at least for me. And I was really, really happy with what they did. It's almost going to be hard to imagine Ahsoka having any conflict now because she's so zen. If she was any more relaxed, she'd just go down the drain. So hopefully that won't happen.
Yeah, she's heading to the spice dens, right?
We do need to give a shout out to Greg Cass on Rebel Base Card. He 100% predicted the Jonah and the whale. That was his has to happen.
Yes, for sure.
But I also love Hu Yang as like a counter point because I think we haven't really talked about Hu Yang at all.
No, and he's pretty rich in this one.
And he was he's been incredible all season, but I think this episode, just the with where they discover him on the edge of the cliff, and he says,
and he's holding the helmet.
Heartbreaking, yeah, right. And he's like, I told them to stay together, they never listen. And he says it twice, they never listen, and it's like the most emotional we've ever heard a droid. I feel like
yes, he's vulnerable emotionally, which he's not usually like that.
David Tennant is just crushing it.
Yes,
and sure. Then but anyway, the extra things that they're doing with Hu Yang as well, like the blink that he has before they take off in the Purgle, like it, it's the same, like somehow emotions coming through with it. And I think that is just masterful how they're doing that.
But I also love that Ahsoka's the crazy risk taker, and he's like, this could go anywhere. What are we doing? And she's like, it's better than going nowhere.
Yeah.
Right. That's the best, one of the best exchanges I think that we've had in the series so far.
I agree.
That spark of adventure, right? So key to Ahsoka's character.
I almost would have been okay with like, this is how season 1 ends. Like that would have been really bold. Wouldn't that have been cool? And we just have to wait to see. I mean, I think everybody's like, please don't do that. I almost wish it happened. The only other exchange, again, this episode deserves an entire series of conversations about it. And there's a lot of our friends who do wonderful podcasts that break all this down for us as well. When Hera and Hu Yang are in the cockpit, and Hera says to Hu Yang, so what was her master like? And then it's quiet, and I think there's that blank, and Hu Yang looks at Hera and he says, intense. Mason and I laughed and we high-fived because what an incredible understatement that is. I thought that was just great. Absolutely.
It's the most polite thing he could have said.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, and you know what's cool on top of that is that that's Anakin's response to the Siege of Mandalore.
Mhm.
Yep.
Where because he wasn't there for that, and he's like, "Oh, what's this?" and looks intense, and I was just like, "Oh, well done, golf clap right here."
I caught that the second viewing as well. That was terrific. We haven't even talked about Hera really that much. I mean, I don't know. There's a ton to say. I'm once again very happy with her and the performance and their chemistry as a group. And hearing the name Organa mentioned is enough to promote the Nurse Applause, because then you remember, oh wait, Luke and Han and Leia are around. You know, theoretically they are around for this kind of stuff. So boy, is it great. I'm trying to keep it under an hour. I think we're going to be close. Are there things that we didn't bring up that you'd like to both talk about?
I think the one little thing that I'll bring up, and I don't know, it may get lost on a lot of people, but when Ahsoka is holding the map and talking about how it holds these memories, and it's controlling, or not controlling, but memories are embedded. It made me think of, and it's one of my favorite Star Wars books, and I don't think it gets enough credit, is The Force Collector.
Yep.
By Kevin Shinnick.
Mm-hmm.
And how the protagonist in that young adult novel, that is his Force power. Like, and that's like all he can do. And I love going through that so much. So as she's tracing the steps and hearing everything, that just, all I could think of was this book. And I was just like, you know what, I'm so far behind on reading, but now I want to read this again.
So Ezra can do that too. That ability is called psychometry. When you're able to touch an object and sort of understand its history. And I think, doesn't Kylo Ren able to do that? I think too, a little bit as well. So yeah, it's a pretty unique ability that we haven't really seen Ahsoka tap into that I can remember. But yeah, that was a cool moment. Jen, anything else that we didn't bring up that you'd like to share?
I wanted to ask both of you what you thought about the title of this episode, Shadow Warrior, because I think it's the least obvious title that we've gotten so far. Right? Because last week it was like, oh, it's Anakin, it's Baylan, it's also Ahsoka literally falling, right? But Shadow Warrior, I feel like, to me, is a little bit more obtuse.
I think speaking of Joseph Campbell, I think the shadow is like the darker part of ourselves that we are afraid of, that some people let just thrive and wreak havoc. And so the Shadow Warrior could very much be Anakin's shadow of Vader. But I also think it's Ahsoka's fear of self and just being about death and destruction, as Baylan astutely pokes her mentally for.
Well, and that was again jumping back to Lord of the Rings style. That's where Gimli said that Gandalf fell into shadow.
Yep.
So it's again that component of, you don't know where you are when you're in the darkness. You could be anywhere. What's going to come out of the darkness?
For me too, I think, and I agree. I love all of that. I think that makes a lot of sense. For me, there's also kind of like a meta level of Ahsoka as this character who has had to sort of squeeze into different pockets of Star Wars canon, right? Because it was like when her genesis was sort of I don't want to call it a retcon because people usually associate that with negative connotations, but this idea that after the prequel trilogy, she was created to kind of fit back into that timeline retrospectively. And she's always been doing that. She's always been kind of showing up in different parts of the Star Wars timeline and having to kind of fit into the continuity. And so I think for me personally, because I wrote about that in my review for last week's episode, that she's sort of been this shadow character in Star Wars and has somehow managed to thrive.
Which is terrific. All right. Well, that was what a great way to be able to break this down and to embrace the incredible episode, Shadow Warrior. We've only got 3 episodes to go, which is so exciting and bittersweet because I just don't want this journey with the two of you to end. Okay, so we probably should give our letter grades. We're wrapping things up, but we need to add our letter grades. So Thank you. There's a reason why you're called Qui-Gon Jinn. Thank you for reminding me of that as we almost signed off. Jen, why don't we start with you? Your letter grade on the episode.
Well, I'm glad that I saved the plus and held back last week because I'm ready to give it this week. So it's A+, which again, like I'm never, as a teacher, I'm never used to giving because we're not allowed to give A+ where I teach. So it's like way beyond my capabilities to do so, and feels a little weird. But yeah, I'd say that this knocked it out of the park in every way that I had hoped. It was, and so focused on Ahsoka as a character and kind of her development and her journey and her history. Plus, we didn't really even talk about Purgles enough. I don't think, never enough Purgle talk. But just the scene of her communicating with the Purgle and sort of, retuning with the Force in that way was one of the most epic Star Wars moments that I've ever seen. And I was listening to the audio in my car, driving around, like drop my kids off at school and picking them up. And that's the part that made me cry in my car.
I get it.
And there was no dialogue. It was just the music and just me remembering what was happening in that scene. So yeah, for me, this was an all-timer.
Excellent. Now I'm determined to take one of your classes and get an A+.
It would have to be unofficial.
Yes, of course.
We know people.
Okay, Ross, what about you?
Yeah, I'm that same boat where there wasn't much of this that I would have wanted changed at all. It was everything I was hoping for and more. And, through crazy circumstances, I got to watch it in such a magical way. And the majesty, the wonder, the energy, the momentum that this is building, not only for tonight, but for the rest of the show is an A+ to me. And I'm going to give it 100%. I don't know that I could do that. I don't know that I've ever done that for a grade scale for a show or anything like that. But I left there feeling like I did when I walked out of Empire Strikes Back in the theater as a little kid.
That's great. I love that. Wow. I'm so happy that you had that experience that you had. I'm not giving it an A+. I will give it an A because it is absolutely an A. The reason it's not an A+ for me is because I still think it's we're earning an emotional payoff that we don't have the entire formula to, and I think that's a little challenging for me to accept. But I'm also reserving the right to modify that as time goes on, because still visually was stunning. Hayden was absolutely brilliant. Rosario Dawson was terrific. And the young Ahsoka, this is pretty fun. Her name is Ariana Greenblatt. You know her. If you saw the Barbie movie, and based on the box office receipts everybody in the universe did, she played the daughter of what's her name, Mercedes, right? Is that the mom, the actor in that? Is that her name?
America Ferrera.
Yes. And she also played the young Gamora in Infinity War.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's super fun.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are, with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is...
It's been great, of course, reviewing the episode. Please let everybody know where they can find the both of you and your great work. Jen, let's start with you.
Sure. You can find my writing at thelongtake.substack.com. And you can subscribe to a newsletter every time I publish a review on there. It can go directly into your inbox. I'm doing weekly breakdowns of Ahsoka. And it's actually been really nice being on this podcast every week, because it's really, I think, pushing me out of my comfort zone, because I feel like we talk so thoroughly about the episode here, then I'm like, oh, what left do I have to say about this episode? So it's really helped me kind of like focus on specific things, which has been really nice. And you can find me on Instagram and Threads at Sopchockchai, Sopchockchai. And you can find me on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jinn. You can also subscribe to the Long Take Review, my podcast that's a film podcast with one eye always on the Oscar race.
Love it. And Ross.
Yeah, so the music podcast, the album Cockpit Podcast, listen on Spotify and you hear the music as you go through. It's on a pretty much an unscheduled hiatus right now, probably because of Ahsoka. But I'm willing to make this trade right now. I have some good albums in the hopper, but I'm not ready to get to them yet because I'm so into these conversations that we're having, into waiting for each episode to come out and then to listen to everyone else's podcasts about it. So that's fantastic. You could also find me on Instagram at PopstarIndie, and a big shout out to the Midwest Garrison of the 501st for being there last night and just being a great group of people to be around as well.
Thank you again to Jen and Ross for joining me and sharing their thoughts on Ahsoka. It is always great to chat with them, just like it's always great to chat with every one of you. It's so cool. Seriously, it is so cool how this community continues to grow and how much we're able to share our love of Star Wars together. CoffeeWithKenobi.com is where you can go for Star Wars news, announcements, reviews, videos, and so much more. The official travel partner of Coffee with Kenobi is MEI and Mousefan Travel. Go to coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefantravel for a no-cost, no-obligation quote where they can help you plan your magical vacation to all things Disney, including the East and West Coast homes of Galaxy's Edge, of course, Walt Disney World and Disneyland. They can also help you book that Disney cruise and give you that peace of mind that we all appreciate when planning our next vacations. As an avid coffee lover, it is my honor to partner with Thomas Coffee, the official brew of Coffee with Kenobi. They even have offered us an exclusive code for CWK listeners. Go to thomascoffees.com to check them out and make sure to use the brand new discount code of DanZCWK20. That's all one word, DanZCWK20 for 20% off your order. Please be sure to use that code DanZCWK20 for 20% off your order. CWK Live is every Tuesday night at 7 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time at coffeewithkenobi.com/live. You can come to the Facebook group, which is the CWK Cafe, at coffeewithkenobi.com/community for Star Wars thoughts, comments, reviews, and opinions in a family-friendly, spoiler and drama-free place. Coffee with Kenobi is possible because of the members of the CWK Alliance. Thanks to you, the podcast, CWK Live, event coverage, and so much more comes to life. Find out how you can help the show for as little as $1 a month by joining the CWK Alliance, and you will receive access to CWK Prover and exclusive weekly audio and video podcasts not heard anywhere else. Find out more at coffeewithkenobi.com/CWK Alliance. And 10% of your monthly contributions to our Patreon page go directly to the St. Jude Children's Hospital. Got a question or a comment? You can email me, DanZ at coffeewithkenobi.com. Connect with me on Twitter at Mr. Zer, MRZEHR, on Instagram at DanZerCWK, or on LinkedIn. Coffee with Kenobi can be found on social media, on Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, TikTok. You can give the show a like on Facebook at facebook.com/coffeewithkenobi, or subscribe to Coffee with Kenobi's YouTube channel, where you can find access to over 700 videos, past live shows, and events, plus the audio of this podcast. Please take a couple of minutes to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. And if you want to get a logo shirt or coffee mug or sticker, go to coffeewithkenobi.com/shop. If you're interested in starting a podcast or a blog or want to expand your brand, you can go to danzmedia.com to help you get that process started. I'm also available to come to your school, conference, business, or organization to talk about how to tap into your strengths and help you bring out your very best. Thank you so much to all of you for joining me for a virtual cup of coffee. I love and appreciate your time and look forward to the next opportunity to talk Star Wars with all of you. I'm Dan Zare, reminding you that this is the podcast you're looking for.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.